My journey began feeling really disempowered to begin with a lot of the clients that I was working with, because I had many individuals trying to find their authentic self, incredibly insightful individuals, knowing that they wanted to create safety and security, maybe healing from their own past trauma, maybe in their own relationships. And yet what I would hear week after week was not reports of empowering shifts, was actually a lot of hopelessness and powerlessness. And it took me really understanding the whole human experience, which includes the body, the nervous system, which is evolutionarily wired to seek safety, to really understand why so many of us are stuck. And spending a lot of that time actually, and applying it to this book, working with couples, I think nowhere do we see these patterns, even in the subtitle, right? Break cycles, another common buzzword. We're cycle breakers. Well, why are so many of us stuck? It's because in that subconscious part of our mind, we don't actually have safety and security created, because back in childhood we didn't have the attunement that we needed, we didn't have the resources maybe that we needed to meet our needs. And so the reality of it is, as adults, very few of us actually know what the embodied experience of safety and the security is. And what we then end up relying on, outside of our awareness of course, is those habitual patterns, because they feel safe to us. So I love this as a starting point, because safety, I can't talk enough about it. In my own journey included really understanding how conditioned I was, and how much the patterns I was seeking, the habitual safety I was kind of trying to create, was not safe at all. Had a lot of stress, a lot of overwhelming emotions. And I think this is what a lot of us come to the conclusion around, which is we're not broken necessarily. We're just relying on old habits that served us at one time that actually aren't safe and don't create security, and don't allow us to ultimately, like you beautifully said, be our authentic self. Though, of course, with that awareness, we can begin to make new choices.
And it's so enlightening when you realize that it's nothing, like, you know, just the kind of quintessential example of like a very intelligent woman that continues to stay in an abusive relationship. And we're like, why? How does she not see? Or how is she choosing that? Like, how does she not have she's so smart. She, like, why, you know? And when you, as you so beautifully lay out in your book, when you understand that the brain is literally designed to seek out the familiar, because the uncertain is such a much bigger threat. So we literally like look for familiar and patterns to feel safe, but it's such a false sense of safety. And so that's just like literally what we're perceiving is not reality. There's so many different ways of saying it, but the psychologist, the theory of constructed emotions, it's like they're self-created. It's not even reality.
Yeah. I think what you're really kind of highlighting is a difficult reality for a lot of us humans, which is how subjective this experience is. I think a lot of us have this idea that when we talk about emotions, things are objective. You and I could share the same experience and we'd both leave feeling angry if something upsetting happened. And that's just not the reality of it. We are constructing and co-creating, exactly like you're describing, through the way we're filtering the environment. I mean, there's just too much stimulation to attend to or to pay attention to in any given moment. We have to, and outside of our awareness, our brain does that for us. It determines which pieces of information are applicable to us. So even right there, we're already deleting from our experience part of our experience. And the same conversation applies, and this was mind-blowing for me, coming from a training program in clinical psychology, where I think most people think, it's based around emotions. It took me until several years out of my program to truly understand what emotions were. They're not just thoughts that live in our mind, they're physiologies that live in our body. And that's another area where we prefer the habitual. And this beautifully, I think that example you gave is really common. We might be the person with very well-meaning loved ones shouting from the sidelines saying, why are you still in this relationship? Or why are you pursuing this person? Don't you see those red flags? And in reality, those red flags feel comfortable to us. And to some extent, no, we might not be perceiving them or filtering them the way these well-meaning loved ones are able to see. So, and again, I think relationships, because we are relational creatures, our nervous systems, again, down to our wiring, our biological wiring, our physiology, we need those points of connection, that emotional support that comes with relating to other people. And in our relationships, I think, is where the large majority of us, as adults at least, we lack safety and security. So the patterns that we are repeating aren't grounded ones like you're describing, are ones where we maybe are overstepping our boundaries or are in relationships with people that are overstepping our boundaries. And here's where no amount of insight, that very well-meaning suggestion from our loved ones, doesn't shift us into ability to be able to change, because there's that wiring that feels so comfortable, feels so familiar, knows who we are in that type of relational dynamic.
Totally. And I wrote down some quotes here because they're just so profound in your book. But we are social creatures, and our deepest need, you say our deepest need we all have in our relationships, whether we are children or adults, is to feel safe and secure enough to be ourselves without losing the connection to or support of others. So what and I've learned this before, but it just, for some reason, the way that you lay it out in the book is so, it just lands. And so our parents, bless their hearts, they were in survival. They were just, dealing with the reality of their situation and passed down generational conditioning. And so, if our perceived environment wasn't safe, like I think you and I both became overachievers, and we can go into those different types and the behaviors that we developed. But, we adapted to our environment that we didn't feel safe in, and we developed behaviors and personas to get the love and support and connection we needed, So it wasn't our authentic selves. Like, we developed what we thought based on, these little kids' perception that, oh, it's our fault. We're not lovable. We're not enough. That's why dad's stressed. That's why dad's blowing up. That's why mom's disconnected. That's why mom's in bed all day. Whatever those things are, we took it upon ourselves to have a belief about ourselves that we're not worthy. And then we developed behaviors to try and earn that love. And so, no wonder we are, even as adults, until we start to become aware of those behaviors, which your book will help us do. It certainly did about myself. Can we start to question whether those beliefs at our core and, that are driving our behaviors are true, and if they serve us any longer?
And I think the point you're making here, Kelly, is so beautiful, because I want listeners to truly hear this, which is these adaptations, these conditioned ways of being, these masks we wear, these roles we play, at one time were adaptive, were the best scenario, the best choice that we can make to keep ourselves as connected as was possible to those earliest caregivers. Because that wiring to connect, that need in childhood, it's even stronger, because we are born completely dependent. We can't physiologically keep ourselves alive, sustain life as an infant. So we need whatever version of caretaking. And I know that we definitely individually, there's a spectrum of those of us who had present caregivers able to meet our physical needs, maybe didn't have emotionally attuned caregivers. Some of us might not have had any adult necessarily present at all to us. So the most kind of evolutionarily sound thing we can actually do is to adapt, is to keep our focus and attention on sustaining whatever bond or whatever connection was available, because those were life-giving. So these adaptations, which absolutely begin very early on, do begin a creation of these beliefs, because our childlike mind, just like our adult mind, is always trying to make sense of the world, is trying to anticipate, is trying similarly to keep ourselves safe. So it's always kind of assessing and assigning meanings to the events that are happening. And so in childhood, why this is the origin of a lot of beliefs is because when we don't have that emotional maturity that we gain as we age to kind of zoom out, and like you and I are having a conversation where we're able to say, yes, we had well-meaning parents, though because of resources, education, maybe their own traumas, they weren't able to show up for us and in the way that we need it, right? This is a mature perspective. We're able to zoom out and see all of the different nuanced factors that impact a person's decisions, many of which have nothing, if not all of which, have nothing to do with us. In childhood, when we don't have that ability and we're still trying to make sense of why our caregivers weren't physically present, maybe they were physically abusive, maybe they were emotionally absent, whatever the case was for us, the only way our immature mind will be able to make sense of it without all of those mature factors will land on a very egocentric, or I'm the problem reason. So now we have this deep-rooted meaning, well, the the person I need isn't available to me because of something inherently wrong with me, now I make even a stronger case for me to keep that part of me suppressed below the surface and to only be this other person, this conditioned being, again, wear this mask, play this role. So I just like to emphasize and spend time on this because as we become aware, I think many of us can shift into either shaming ourselves for all of these conditioned ways that we were and all of the outcomes that that created, or we immediately have the expectation that we just know who we authentically are and are able to make choices from that space. But I think understanding that these are adaptive, which means that we need it to become this version of ourselves. Maybe we can relieve some of the shame that we feel as a result of having made that a choice, again, because all of that was made unconsciously. And then we can give ourselves a little bit of patience and compassion as we try to break these habits or break these cycles, because it doesn't happen the immediate moment we become aware that they're there, because they're still playing that protective role.
Thank you for listening to the Heal Podcast. Be sure to tune in every Thursday for more empowering wisdom and inspiring healing stories. And make sure you hit the follow button on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts so you don't miss that one episode that holds the answer you've been searching for. And please rate and review us so that we can grow and reach more people. Thanks so much, and be well.